Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Teodor Sigaev. In Postgres development, I participate since 2000. I became contributor, committer, and since the last 5 years, I've been working in Postgres Pro company, where I'm a technical director. I would like to just briefly tell you about our product, Postgres Pro Enterprise. To my surprise, I've been a developer always, and one thing which I learned since the last 5 years is that there may be several points of view, and at least for our product, there are 4 points of view. There is marketing point of view of the people who are reading about it, advertising it. There is users' point of view. These are the people who are developing applications. There's engineering point of view from DB and operation of the database from 1 instance up to 1 million instances. And developer's point of view, which is from outside of Postgres, so to speak. This is a point of view of code of Postgres. I would like to tell you right away that marketing, I'm far away from it, so I will not review this point of view. As user, I started actually, and I wrote a couple of applications for PostgreSQL, but I've never operated this database, but more or less I understand. And our engineers like to blame me that I do not understand them. They can even raise their hands, so I can kick them later. I will tell you from the point of view of the developer and particularities of Postgres Pro Enterprise from the point of view of operation and development of applications. I will talk about version 12 mostly, which is under testing and will be released very soon. A little bit of information for the beginning. Postgres Pro is almost similar to Postgres Vanilla. Each incoming connect is a separate process, and there are more processes in Postgres. There are some which are related to the processing of requests, and if you saw, you can build a graph, a dependence of number of processes of Postgres from its version, and it's been increasing constantly, and recently it became even faster because of the parallel processing of queries. There are a lot of discussion about this, which is better, thread model or process model, and both of them have their advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons, and Postgres model takes its started when the threads were available, but they didn't work properly. So currently we need to understand very well if we want to redesign it. For instance, our favorite pros is security, simplicity. It's easy for administrator, for engineer, for operation system. Moreover, operation system likes to close all file descriptors, and when thread is killed, nobody cares, you need to care yourself. Less fragmentation of memory. And there are some cons, at least in the current version, is still big cache, which shows it's like a virtual memory. In multi-thread model, such cache is just one, it's unified for the whole process, and here every process has its own card. And moreover, the context switch leads to failure of TLB. So when you have a situation when there are lots of processes competing for the CPU, you have to restart this cache often. Then connect is more costly, although in Linux they are realized from the same calling of clone. And cooperation of processes is not as simple as we wish. And you can actually make a mistake, but it doesn't matter because we need to take care that the memory globally is visible to all threads. You do not need to care about it too much. You need to put more efforts to conceal it. And there is a problem of several connections. When it happens, first of all, when application is migrating from somewhere, they work with multi-thread databases. Next is usually on the web. We have a process how it, of course it should use connect to the database, but considering that they are running on tens of machines, you have 100 connections. But this is a lightweight service. The next magic is inside Postgres, that it remembers all of its ancestors, descendants, and you need to go through it, and the more it is, the more processes you have, the longer it is, and the more and more often you have to go inside. And surprising situation is with logs, because since a lot of time, since 2000s, I understood that optimization of logs for single core and multi-core machines should be different. And currently Postgres can work with up to several hundreds of cores. Currently it's solved with Verilog. Some things we had to redesign, rewrite, because atomic operations were not atomic exactly, because it's a separate microcode, and we had to receive 2 cycles, and Alexander rewrote it. Each backend and each connect has to cache the memory of the database. Either each query will go into the system catalog with the question which fields this table has, or we cache it. And if we cache it, then each backend will have to keep it in memory. Cache actually are freed with difficulty, and 1C, for example, which creates a database, by default it has 10,000 tables. And you have to cache all of that, temp buffers. Each backend has a memory for temporary tables, and based on necessity, it never empties them. And if you create a temporary table, then backend will keep this memory, and it will not give it back to operation system unless you restart the backend or kill the connection. Workman is the same, but it doesn't live so long. Its lifespan is short. There is another con. Recently I encountered about 1,000 left outer joins. Postgres just took 4 gigabytes for planning. Scheduler looks at Workman as at something bad, and it doesn't consider it for scheduling and planning. And if scheduler stuck in Workmem, then they stopped planning. Workmem is actually for evaluation by scheduler of the memory required for executor. That's it. So how we solve such problems? Several connections. We can switch to threads. We tried it in the past by invasion, and we see that every static variable in the code has to be dependent on the context of thread, and we have to manually go one by one, and some modules has their own variables which we need to select, and if there is a global variable, common for all threads, then usually, statistically, it is difficult to understand that this variable is safe. Maybe it's for one session, maybe it's global, maybe it's something else. You never know. There is a solution with poolers, client-side pooler and server-side pooler. This is when you do it with an application. One way or another, DBC driver can do this, DBC driver as well, but there is a question, how should we live with this pooler? And it's convenient when you have many connections in the database because you have many applications. You have not just one application working in multi-thread mode, but several applications working with this database. And there is a solution, PGBouncer. PGBouncer has currently a problem which cannot be solved, that it's single-threaded, and it means that if you have small queries, but you have many of them and they are multi-threaded, then they will not just warm up the CPU, but also the memory bus, because it will take from user space to the card the packages. And it can become a bottleneck because of that. There is such an option, and PGBouncer now supports it. It's appeared in Linux quite recently. And basically this is access for application to listen for the same address and the same port. And which application will take the connection? Then operation system is deciding. You can put on the same port and same address several PGBouncers, and in this case you can parallel them more or less successfully. The second problem is that PGBouncer has to give to the client the clean connect, and it means that it should clean the internal condition, and to reset the variables and something else, it cannot do it itself, so it sends it to the database, which means additional queries to the database. It's a simple, like reset all, but still. And as I've just said, there is no internal condition for PGBouncer, and you cannot use the temporary tables between the transactions. Inside the transactions you can, but if it's short, then maybe you could reuse it, this temporary table, or something else temporary. But no, they will fail, and the next transaction you will have to restart. From the point of view of the engineers who operate it, you will get another additional process which you have to monitor and maintain. And also there is a problem with authentication, because it has its own authentication which is different from the database. You need to configure it so it's the same, but if you're using SSA, for example, without even necessity, then it's not a problem of PGBouncer. But if you have to use SSL, then it will become a problem of PGBouncer and yours, how to configure all of this at the same time. Inbuilt pooler. It was implemented in the version 11 as experiment. Now we think it's ready for production. We can start it. One backend. In this model, we have a dynamic pool of backends, which are created by necessity, and when we do not need them, they stop. And one backend can work with several sessions. There is configuration for management of all this in the documents. I will not tell you in detail right now, because documentation is available freely, so you can ask your questions at any time. Authentic comes from server, so this is about the inbuilt pooler. A little bit more in detail, session is not a backend. Backend must remember all its sessions, and when the new session comes, it should somehow take a backend which will be operated. And we doesn't talk about that session is distributed between different backends. No, for maintenance, it's one backend. And when it switches between the sessions, it should store the session variable and temporary tables, etc. It has to keep it in the memory, and at the same time it shares between the sessions, reduces the requirements for the memory. These are temporary buffers, and of course there is a certain level of you need to use several sessions, you need to increase the temporary buffer accordingly, but sometimes you have to keep it just in case, and just some transactions will use this whole volume of memory. In this case, you will have economy.
The general caches of the catalog, because the backend is not being disturbed by other databases. So if you have a pool that is organized on the principles, well, you have a bunch of backends for one database, and the backend is tied to this database, and we have basically untied the user, and so the users can be different. We've unlinked them, but we did not unlink a single backend, because one backend is still servicing one database. Yes, of different users, yes, of different sessions, but still of one database. But here we run into an issue. All the modules that we're shipping in together with Enterprise, now we've gone over them, and the documents has the list of modules that, let's put it this way, that is not entirely incompatible. So do use it with care. For example, the PG, whatever. Have you used the module PG time and two people? I think Ivan has used it as well. It's that thing that allows you to get the variables into this, and the variables in such a thing are going to be shared amongst an unpredictable amount of sessions. It is fairly easy to actually solve it. The only thing you need to get some identifier into the name of the variable. Of course, we're going to improve this in the future, but for now, we have a list of modules and extensions that is not very compatible with the pooler. Now, the next feature that we are hoping to now, I will allow the exercise to be performed by you. Why didn't we do it earlier? Why didn't we do the minor upgrade? Is coming only later. But it's a usual case where you get all the various CVE, all various security bug fixes coming out. We sometimes get the bug fixes that are needed, the bugs that right now are making life hard. And so the bug fix came out because they need to be fixed urgently. And usually the developers, and I must confess me as well, are fairly lighthearted on the question of restarting. So like, what happens? We'll just restart it. We'll continue going. Restart it and let it just do its own job. And not even Rambler, Mail.ru has taught me when it shows me that the database takes 6 or 8 hours to warm up its database, and if you have a huge instance that is overloaded, one restart of the server means that your service doesn't work for half a day. And if it happened in the best time of day, then it could be out for the entire day. So the restart, for the engineers and the market people, they don't like it. So both the developers of the databases and of applications are usually treated very normally, but I've already confessed to this, and please accept my confession on behalf of others as well. Now, minor upgrades. Well, we want to, like Nginx. So if anybody has used Nginx, you know that if you launch the second copy, then everything is slowly going to be merging into the new version. And we are going to be trying, well, we're discussing now among the developers within the company. It turns out that we need this sysadmins to know that exec does not close sockets, just in case. On the various, we have many CIS developers here, so not too many CIS developers, right? But guys, if you have any friends, keep it in mind, exec does not close the sockets. They'll understand what that means. And The idea is that we're changing the postmaster to a new one, and now all the new processes are going to fork out from the new postmaster, and we're going to just wait for the old ones to just die off naturally. And at the end of the day, we can forcibly terminate them if the bug is too annoying. Now, the problem here, what are the problems here? That right now it's not that easy to prove, and we need to prove and not to just test that a minor upgrade is possible at all when you are switching from version A to version B. First of all, you can experience the internal changes in the shared memory. It is the human participation, so you need to play around separately. How are the preload line memories going to be working? We seemingly will have to. We're going to still experience lots of fun with this, fun, but nevertheless, we still want to get it done. The locking protocol. Now, this is the worst one, and an example of this is the end of last year when Alexander Korotkov, has found a deadlock in Genie, terminated it. But how can you live when you have one backend with one protocol of locks and the other one has a different one? We don't really have an answer to that yet. So, and moreover, it seems that the answer is you can't live with that. So a minor upgrade is not always possible. It really depends on the types of bugs we're talking about. Now, the next news. The adaptive query optimization. At last, we were able to eliminate the possibility. It didn't used to sort the data very well to the ones that are trustworthy, not trustworthy, and now you have the capacity to turn off its work with the non-trustworthy data, and then it becomes a lot better at learning. The current regime of adaptive learning optimization can be taught and can be turned off, and honestly, as a person who grew up with a car with a manual gearbox, in the automatic gearbox, its smartness drives you nuts. Like, you sometimes want a button to just turn off the smartness. Like, oh damn it, you're too smart. Stop learning. I just want to drive like I want to drive. And the service functions that have been added for the engineers. So we had some small benchmarks. At the very bottom, you have the link to it. And right now, the development is undertaken by Andrei Lepikhov. Wave your hand. Now, if any of you have any questions regarding on how to apply this properly, do ask him. But it really does help, even though it requires separate attention from engineers and maybe sometimes even from users. And we have seen a module PG Prostats, and this is like a spiritual inheritance of, and this is needed for get the monitoring of the information. And generally in the database, this is really a database for the development of these functional and the collection of statistics that is directed towards the best examples of the modern software design. So this is a database. You can apply modules to it that put together statistics and the buffer that keeps it disappear sooner or later. So this is a basic building block, and we need to add something to it that would save the stuff to the persistent storage, and something like a PG profile that out of that would create reports that you could look over with your eyes already. They're telling me that I'm short for time. Yeah, I'm taking up all the time. You guys are meant to be drinking coffee now, right? Oh. I'm trying to make time. Now, these are the things that I think you need to pay your attention to in the Enterprise 12 that is coming out once again. But just in case, I'm going to remind you that there are 64-bit transactions in the Enterprise. Forget about the wraparounds. So it's not a bad thing to try and keep track of it, but I suggest that you actually keep track of the few times that it actually happens. Now, multi-master, I would recommend to watch it. auto prepayment has also happened. So now it has the opportunity to cut not only apart bit by bit, but also by the overall memory. So as it turned out, the products of some of our partners and some of their products, without the prepare, would be unworkable on Postgres altogether. In the compressed file systems, so in the Postgres Pro and Postgres Pro Enterprise knows how to condense, knows how to compress the various files, and now you can choose the way you file, and sometimes it can be very helpful. For some reason this year, and I mean at the conference, I already mentioned it like 18 and a half times. Why, for some reason, people have a task. Well, it's just a thing that allows you to get a module from instance to instance without touching the PG restore and stuff like this. Now, PGN 3. Today, Bruce was talking about PGN 10 a bit, and we have B3. This is an analog, and more than that, now it's trying to make its way into the 13th vanilla Postgres. Deduplication of B3, so this is just the reduction of its size, sometimes fourfold. The delayed writing time of tables, this allows you to sometimes increase performance. We have prioritization, we have the restoring of the broken block from the replica and not the restoration of the entire master from the replica. You can also install some variables in the neighboring backend. We have the session timeout, we have PG weight sampling, something that is not present in the vanilla version. Well, this all came as a result of working with the lock of the huge machines. We have lists and allowances. Now in Enterprise, they're no longer limited by 8 kilobytes. Now we have the column storage, but it's not big, but it works. There is a certain limit on the transactions, but they're still all memory, so that's good. There's Pro backup and it's incremental backup. There's a scheduler, very similar to Chrome, but inside the database itself. And I'm just going to speak only. I only spoke for 2 minutes longer than I was meant to, so thank you very much for your attention. And the video is being recorded, right? So you'll be able to later replay this on a slower pace and to understand what exactly I've been talking. Okay, and now after all these spells, we can answer the questions now. What was that? What exactly from you have just listed does what? So if any of you have questions, do ask them. Andrei, I think you want to ask what does PG profile have to do with anything here? Well, yeah, hi. My question is as follows. So during our previous conference, I remember you had snapshots, and how are they doing? Well, to be honest, with snapshots, it worked out. Well, how did it work out? During testing, it turned out that we found out one thing that is fairly costly for the development, and this thing is called, if you have done a snapshot in the point, and at the point of the snapshot your database went down, then you're going to have the snapshot left, but it's only going to be half of it left. And to understand how much is the half, well, it's a challenge. We know how challenging this can be, but walking around and talking to different clients, we understood that this can be a big problem. And when I was just starting this, I said that there are different points of view on this, and it turned out that for some reason, from the point of view of the users, this thing turned out to be interesting in terms of development and a bit in terms of marketing, but in terms of engineers and users, well, yeah, but that's because the developers did not start to pick on the engineers to, hey, come on, roll back the database. But yeah, we're just trying to estimate the time needed and the money that's needed and what we're going to get out of it, so we just put it in the long-term drawer. We didn't really throw it out yet because I personally like the idea, but I'm trying to be realistic in the sense that I'm trying to align the amount of time spent and the results that we get out of this. Yes. Fyodor has a question regarding the very first slide. So are we going to have a switch to threads? To threads? Well, He says that there is more use there than more advantages than disadvantages. Well, once again, yeah, how do we measure happiness? Yeah, this is an unknown way. How do we measure this? Well, to be honest, from the point of view of the really large-scale machines, the much larger performance drop happens not at this level when TLB drop, but it happens because in the larger machines you have the ANUMA architecture, and the difference when you are getting a page out of different processors is fairly significant. And this difference does not depend on the model, on the thread model. And everything else that has to do with the memory and with the looks, what about? Well, with the looks, it can be aided by the fact that in the thread model you have to have different locks, but it does not cancel that when you have one core or multiple cores and many cores, the optimization of these logs have to be built in different ways. So this does not cancel this. So there you'd have to rewrite the locks, and this is the truth. But really, locks are a good thing in this case because they are a small part, a truly small part of Postgres. But running around and trying to chase the static variables and trying to organize the memory, well, this is very invasive. So as best I remember, and I think for the version 8.1 somebody did this. And I think Kostya Nizhnik, are you here? Kostya Nizhnik. Oh, there he is. Yeah, there he is. Come here. Yeah, just approach him and ask him. He has experimented on the transferring. So this is what we call when it's done from things that we had at hand. Well, so it was present, but I don't think that it was something worth fighting for. So yeah, the cache in this case and the access to memory, the general plan of cache memory, the static information about the database, the unified place for holding. Okay, well, what you're saying is true, but when we were talking about the log and when we were talking about the speed, well, you are the guy who started this. Wait, we're not talking about the speed, we're talking about the loading up of resources. Well, memory is getting cheaper, so. And what about the cores? You will not believe it, but they're getting cheaper and cheaper if we are to count them per core. Well, there are benefits, but there are drawbacks as well. But for now, the community thinks that now is not yet time to try and chase this. So because we'd have to do this for 2 years. I think there's only one drawback, and the drawback is security. And security is a great code which is written in order for things not to collapse. Well, everything is good, but you are trying to contemplate this as if the company and the community has infinite resources. How about you participate in their creation, and then we're going to have thread Postgres right here and now. The discussion is actually interesting, and I suggest to continue this, but on the floors and in person. Well, all of you who are shy to ask the questions now can later catch me on the conference and ask me the questions.